The coffee cup felt heavy in his hand as he stood there, completely frozen on the sidewalk. Daniel couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Through the large window of the cafe he saw her. His ex-wife, the woman he'd been married to for 3 years. The woman who'd walked away from him exactly 6 months ago. But that wasn't what made his heart stop. She was holding a baby, not just holding. She had one of those carrier things strapped to her chest, and a tiny infant was nestled against her, so small that Daniel could barely make out the features. His brain immediately started doing the math. 6 months since the divorce was finalized. The baby looked fresh, maybe 3 or 4 months old at most, which meant, no, it couldn't be. His hand started shaking and hot coffee spilled over his fingers. He barely felt the burn. All he could focus on was Rachel, his ex-wife, as she carefully adjusted the carrier with one hand while holding a to-go cup in the other. She looked tired, different. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, nothing like the polished style she used to wear. But there was something else too. Something in the way she moved, the way she touched that baby's head so gently. She looked like a mother. The thought hit him like a punch to the gut. Was he a father? Had she been pregnant when they signed those divorce papers? Had she known and just not told him? Daniel had spent the last 6 months trying to move on, throwing himself into work even more than before if that was possible. His tech company had just closed a massive deal. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he'd been walking around feeling hollow, telling himself the divorce was for the best, that they wanted different things. But a baby? Their baby? Rachel turned toward the door, getting ready to leave. In about 10 seconds, she was going to walk right past him. Daniel's feet finally remembered how to move. He stepped directly into her path just as she pushed through the cafe door. Their eyes met. He watched all the color drain from her face. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She pulled the baby carrier closer to her body, protective like a lioness guarding her cub. That movement told him everything he needed to know before either of them spoke a single word. Rachel. His voice came out wrong, too harsh, too much like the CEO voice he used in boardrooms when he was about to fire someone. She straightened her spine, and he saw that familiar flash of defiance in her eyes, the same look she'd given him the day she asked for the divorce. Daniel, how old? The question burst out of him before he could think of a better way to ask. Excuse me? The baby. How old is the baby? Rachel's jaw tightened. She started to move around him, but he sidestepped, blocking her path again. People walking by were starting to stare. He didn't care. That's really none of your business anymore, she said, and her voice had that edge to it, that tone that used to come out during their worst fights. We're divorced, remember? You made sure of that? I made sure? Daniel felt anger rising in his chest, hot and familiar. You're the one who asked for the divorce. You're the one who gave up on us. I gave up? Rachel's voice cracked, and for a second he saw real pain flash across her face. You gave up on us 2 years before I filed those papers, Daniel. You just didn't bother to tell me. The baby made a small sound, a tiny whimper. Rachel immediately started swaying, that automatic movement mothers do, and Daniel saw her whole body language shift. The baby came first. Before the argument, before her anger at him, before everything. He forced himself to take a breath and lower his voice. Please, just tell me. Is that baby mine? Rachel's hand came up to cradle the baby's head through the carrier. Her fingers were trembling slightly. When she finally looked at him again, there was something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Fear. If that child is mine, Daniel continued, fighting to keep his voice steady, then it is absolutely my business. You know that. What I know, Rachel said quietly, is that you were never home. What I know is that you chose your company over our marriage every single day for 2 years. What I know is that when I told you I was lonely, you said you'd make it up to me later once the next big deal closed. But there was always another deal, Daniel. Always. That's not an answer. No, she said, and now there were tears in her eyes. It's the reason I didn't give you one. A businessman in an expensive suit bumped into Daniel, muttered an annoyed, "Watch it," and kept walking. They were blocking the sidewalk, causing a scene. Daniel didn't care about any of it. All he could focus on was the tiny head of dark hair he could just barely see, nestled against Rachel's chest. We need to talk, he said. Really talk. Not here. Rachel closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, She looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Fine, tonight, your place. 7 o'clock, why my place? Because my apartment is too small for this conversation, and I'm not going to have it somewhere public where people can hear us. She finally stepped around him, and this time he let her go. And Daniel? Prepare yourself, because once we have this conversation, there's no going back. Everything changes. He watched her walk away, her hand never leaving that protective position on the baby's head. She disappeared around the corner, and Daniel stood there on the busy Seattle sidewalk, surrounded by people rushing to their next meeting, their next appointment, their next important thing. For 6 months, he'd convinced himself that the divorce was just a bump in the road, that he'd bounce back like he always did. That work was enough to fill the empty spaces Rachel had left behind. Now, watching the space where she'd disappeared, Daniel realized he might have a daughter. A child who was already 4 months old. 4 months of first smiles he'd missed. 4 months of midnight feedings and tiny fingers and all those moments people said were precious, because they only happened once. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his assistant wondering where he was. He had a meeting in 20 minutes with potential investors, a meeting he'd been preparing for all week, a meeting that could push his company's valuation even higher. Daniel pulled out his phone and stared at the screen. 3 missed calls, 7 unread messages, all urgent apparently. None of it mattered anymore. He typed out a message to his assistant. Cancel everything today. Family emergency. Then he started walking back to his penthouse to prepare for a conversation that might change his entire life. In his mind, he kept seeing that protective way Rachel held the baby. The fear in her eyes, the way her hands trembled. She'd been alone through all of it. Pregnant and alone, going through a divorce. Having a baby without him there, and he'd been celebrating business deals and drinking expensive champagne with colleagues, completely unaware that he might have become a father. The worst part? He couldn't even say she was wrong for not telling him. Because if he was honest with himself, really honest, he knew exactly what kind of husband he'd been toward the end. The kind who wouldn't have noticed his wife was pregnant even if she'd told him. Tonight, at 7 o'clock, he'd learn the truth. And whatever that truth was, Daniel knew one thing for certain. The man who'd spent the last 6 months pretending the divorce didn't hurt was about to disappear. Forever. Whether he was ready or not. 7 o'clock came too fast and too slow at the same time. Daniel had spent the entire afternoon pacing his penthouse, trying to prepare himself for whatever Rachel was going to tell him. He'd rehearsed what he'd say, how he'd react, all the questions he needed answers to. But now, hearing the knock on his door, every single prepared speech flew out of his head. When he opened the door, Rachel stood there with the baby carrier in one hand and a diaper bag slung over her shoulder. She looked like she hadn't slept properly in months. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her clothes were nice but wrinkled, like she'd pulled them straight from the dryer without bothering to fold them first. "Come in," Daniel said, stepping aside. Rachel walked past him into the living room, and he could see her taking in the space. Nothing had changed since she'd left. Same expensive furniture, same massive TV mounted on the wall, same glass coffee table that she'd always said was too impractical. Looking at it through her eyes now, the whole place felt cold. Like a hotel room instead of a home. She set the carrier down carefully on the couch and started unbuckling the baby. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest as he got his first real look at the child. The baby was awake now, staring up at Rachel with wide eyes. She was tiny. So tiny that Daniel was suddenly terrified of even being near her. "Her name is Lily," Rachel said quietly, lifting the baby out and holding her against her shoulder. "She's 4 months old, 4 months. Daniel did the math again, even though he'd already done it 100 times that afternoon. "So you were pregnant when we signed the divorce papers?" "Yes. And you didn't think I had a right to know?" Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. Don't you dare stand there and talk to me about rights when you couldn't even be bothered to come home for dinner more than once a week. That's not fair, isn't it?" Rachel adjusted Lily in her arms, and the baby made a small cooing sound. "Tell me, Daniel, honestly, if I had told you I was pregnant while we were going through the divorce, what would you have done?" He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The truth was, he didn't know. 6 months ago, he'd been a different person. Consumed by work, convinced that success was just one more deal away, blind to everything else. You would have tried to fix it with money, Rachel said, her voice softer now, but somehow more painful. You would have offered to hire a nanny, told me you'd make time, promised things would be different. But they wouldn't have been. You would have resented me for trapping you, resented her for existing. You don't know that, don't I? Rachel sat down on the couch, cradling Lily gently. The last year of our marriage, Daniel, you looked at me like I was a burden, like I was this inconvenient thing you had to deal with before you could get back to work. What was I supposed to think when I found out I was pregnant? That suddenly you'd transform into this present-involved father? Daniel felt like he'd been punched, because she wasn't wrong. He had felt that way sometimes toward the end, annoyed when Rachel wanted to talk about her day, frustrated when she asked him to take a weekend off. He'd loved her, or at least he thought he had, but somewhere along the way she'd become an obstacle between him and his goals. He sank into the chair across from her, suddenly exhausted. When did you find out? About a week before our final mediation session. Rachel looked down at Lily, running her finger gently across the baby's cheek. I'd been feeling sick for weeks, but I thought it was stress. The divorce, losing our life together, everything. Then my sister convinced me to take a test and she trailed off, shaking her head. I sat in that bathroom staring at those 2 lines and all I could think was how alone I felt. You should have told me. Maybe. Rachel's voice cracked slightly. But I was so angry, Daniel, so hurt. You'd made your choice clear. The company mattered more than me, more than us, more than any future we might have had. And I thought if you knew about the baby, you'd try to take her from me. Use your money, your lawyers, your power. Or worse, you'd stay with me out of obligation and hate me for it. Lily started fussing, a small whimpering sound that grew louder. Rachel immediately started swaying, bouncing gently, making soft shushing noises. Daniel watched, transfixed. There was something so natural about the way she moved, like she'd been doing this forever. Is she hungry? He asked awkwardly. Probably tired. She fights sleep like you wouldn't believe. Rachel stood up, still swaying. Do you have somewhere I can lay her down? Daniel led her to the guest bedroom and watched as Rachel placed Lily in the carrier, then pulled out a small blanket to tuck around her. The baby's eyes were drooping now, her fussing quieting to small sighs. She's beautiful, Daniel whispered. Yeah, she is. Rachel straightened up, and when she turned to face him, there were tears streaming down her face. And I'm terrified, Daniel. Terrified that you're going to hate me for this. Terrified that you're going to take her away. Terrified that I've ruined everything. Without thinking, Daniel reached out and pulled Rachel into his arms. She stiffened at first, then collapsed against him, sobbing into his chest. He held her. This woman he'd been married to for 3 years, this woman he'd somehow let slip away, and felt his own tears falling. I'm not going to take her from you, he said into her hair. I promise. Whatever happens, I'm not going to do that. Rachel pulled back, wiping at her eyes. You say that now, but once your lawyers get involved, no lawyers. Daniel said it firmly, even though a part of his brain was screaming that this was insane. Not yet. Not unless we can't work this out ourselves. Work what out? Daniel, I kept your daughter from you for 4 months. You have every right to what? To punish you? To make your life harder than it already is. He shook his head. Rachel, I need you to be honest with me. Really honest. What was it like? The pregnancy? The birth? All of it? She looked at him for a long moment, like she was trying to figure out if this was some kind of trap. Then slowly she started talking. She told him about working at her paralegal job until 2 weeks before her due date because she couldn't afford to stop. About the apartment she'd moved into after the divorce, in a neighborhood that made her nervous to walk alone at night. About going to every doctor's appointment by herself, watching other pregnant women with their partners and trying not to cry. She told him about the labor. 23 hours with only her sister there. About the fear when the baby's heart rate dropped and they talked about a C-section. About the moment Lily was born and the nurse placed her on Rachel's chest, and nothing else in the world mattered anymore. She told him about the first month, when she barely slept, barely ate, barely functioned. About learning to breastfeed and change diapers and decode different types of cries. About the loneliness that was worse than anything she'd felt during the divorce. About holding Lily at 3 a.m, both of them crying, and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake by doing this alone. Daniel listened to all of it, and with every word the guilt grew heavier in his chest. While she'd been going through all of that, He'd been celebrating his company's latest funding round, giving interviews about his success, being photographed for business magazines as one of the city's most eligible bachelors. He'd been living his best life while she'd been surviving. "I'm sorry," he finally said when she finished. "I'm so sorry, Rachel. For all of it. For being a terrible husband, for making you feel like you couldn't tell me about Lily, for not being there when you needed me most." Rachel wiped her eyes again, looking exhausted. "I'm sorry, too, for not giving you a chance, for assuming the worst, for letting my hurt make decisions that affected all three of us." From the carrier, Lily made a soft sound in her sleep. They both turned to look at her, this tiny person who'd changed everything without even knowing it. "What happens now?" Rachel asked quietly. Daniel took a deep breath. "Now I need you to tell me what you need, not what you think I want to hear, not what's going to make this easier. What do you actually need?" Rachel looked surprised, like this was the last question she'd expected. She thought for a moment, staring down at their sleeping daughter. "I need help," she finally admitted. "I need someone else to hold her sometimes so my arms don't feel like they're going to fall off. I need to sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. I need to not feel like I'm drowning every single day." She looked up at him, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. "But I also need to know that if you're going to be in her life, you're really going to be there. Not just when it's convenient. Not just when it fits your schedule. Really there." "I can do that," Daniel said. "Can you?" Rachel's voice was gentle but skeptical. "Because that means missing meetings. Leaving work early. Putting your phone away when she needs you. It means being uncomfortable and tired and covered in spit up. It means choosing her over a deal that could make you millions. Can you really do that?" Daniel looked at Lily sleeping peacefully in her carrier. He thought about all the things he'd accomplished in his life, all the goals he'd achieved, all the success he'd built. None of it had made him feel the way he felt right now, looking at this tiny person who was half him. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I want to try." "Will you let me try?" Rachel studied his face for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay, we'll try." The paternity test results arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Daniel sat in his office, staring at the sealed envelope like it might explode. His hands were shaking. He'd asked Rachel if they could do the test. Not because he doubted her, but because he needed the legal documentation. She'd agreed without argument, though the hurt in her eyes had cut him deeper than any words could have. That was 3 days ago. 3 days of barely sleeping, barely eating, barely able to focus on anything except the question that kept spinning through his mind. What kind of father was he going to be? He'd spent those 3 days watching Rachel from a distance she'd allowed. She'd agreed to let him visit twice, 30 minutes each time. Both visits had been awkward and careful, like they were dancing around broken glass. He'd held Lily, terrified he was doing it wrong, while Rachel watched with tired, wary eyes. Now, alone in his office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city he'd conquered, Daniel tore open the envelope. 0.9% probability of paternity. Lily was his daughter. He'd known it, of course. Had known it from the moment he saw Rachel's face outside that cafe. But seeing it in black and white, official and undeniable, made it real in a way nothing else had. Daniel pressed his hands against his eyes and let himself cry. Not the angry tears from the other night, but something deeper. Grief for the time he'd already lost. Fear of how badly he could mess this up. And underneath it all, something else. Something that felt almost like joy. He had a daughter. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant about the board meeting in an hour. The meeting where he was supposed to present his expansion strategy for the next fiscal year. The meeting he'd been preparing for all month. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called his lawyer. Not to sue Rachel or fight for custody like everyone probably expected. No, he had a different request entirely. 2 hours later, Daniel showed up at Rachel's apartment unannounced. When she opened the door, surprise and suspicion crossed her face in equal measure. "The test results came," he said simply. Rachel's face went pale. She stepped back, letting him in. The apartment was even smaller than he'd imagined, barely bigger than his walk-in closet. But it was clean and organized in that desperate way of someone trying to maintain control when everything feels chaotic. Baby supplies were stacked neatly on shelves. A basket of laundry sat in the corner, half folded. "I know she's yours," Rachel said quietly. You didn't need a test to prove that. I know, but I needed it for this. Daniel pulled out a folder from his briefcase. I had my lawyer draw up some papers. Rachel's whole body tensed. Daniel, please. Don't do this. I know I should have told you, but please don't take her from me. I'll do anything. Rachel, stop. Daniel held up his hand. Just read them, please. With shaking hands, Rachel took the folder and opened it. Daniel watched her eyes scan the pages, saw confusion replace the fear on her face. I don't understand, she said finally. This is a child support agreement, a generous one, and a visitation schedule that I get to control. Keep reading. She flipped to the next page and her eyes widened. You're putting me on your insurance and offering to cover daycare costs? Daniel, this doesn't make any sense. Why aren't you demanding joint custody? Why aren't you trying to? Because I don't want to fight you, Daniel said. I want to be Lily's father, but I don't want to do it by destroying her mother. I messed up, Rachel. I messed up our marriage, and then I wasn't there for the first 4 months of my daughter's life. I can't change any of that, but I can choose what kind of father I'm going to be from this point forward. Rachel sank onto her worn couch, still staring at the papers. I don't understand. Your lawyers must have told you that you could get partial custody easily, that I kept her from you and that would look bad for me in court. They did tell me that. Daniel sat down next to her, careful to keep some distance between them. They laid out a whole strategy, how we could paint you as vindictive, how we could use your financial situation against you, how we could make your life very difficult until you agreed to give me what I wanted. So why didn't you? Daniel looked around the tiny apartment. He saw the stack of past-due bills on the counter that Rachel had tried to hide under a magazine, the cheap curtains that didn't quite block out the streetlight, the second-hand baby swing in the corner. I hired a private investigator, he admitted. Not to dig up dirt, to understand, to see what your life has been like since the divorce. Rachel's face flushed with anger. You investigated me? I needed to know the truth. Not the version either of us tells ourselves to feel better, but the real truth. Daniel pulled out his phone and opened a file. You worked until 2 weeks before Lily was born. You gave birth at County General because that's what your insurance covered. You've been living on cereal and ramen because you're spending every penny on her. You haven't bought yourself new clothes in months. Your car failed inspection, but you can't afford to fix it, so you've been taking the bus everywhere with a baby. Tears were streaming down Rachel's face now. Stop it. While you were going through all of that, Daniel continued, his own voice breaking, I was celebrating a funding round with champagne that cost more than your monthly rent. I was being featured in magazines. I was living in a penthouse and complaining about how hard my life was because I had to work long hours. I said, stop it. I can't stop it, Rachel, because I need you to understand something. Daniel turned to face her fully. Well, you were right about me. Everything you said the other night was true. I was a terrible husband. I prioritized all the wrong things. And if you had told me you were pregnant during the divorce, I probably would have reacted exactly the way you feared. Rachel was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. Then why are you here? Why are you doing this? Because seeing that report, seeing what you went through alone broke something in me. Daniel wiped his own eyes. I saw what kind of man I'd become, and I hated him. I've spent the last few days thinking about my own father. He was never around either. Always working, always busy, always chasing the next thing. And I swore I'd never be like him. But I became exactly like him. Worse even, because at least he was there for the important moments. From the small bedroom they heard Lily start to fuss. Rachel automatically started to get up, but Daniel gently touched her arm. Can I try? He asked. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. Daniel walked into the bedroom, his heart pounding. Lily was in a crib that looked like it had been assembled from a second-hand store. She was awake, her little face scrunched up and getting ready to really cry. Hey, sweet girl, Daniel said softly, reaching down to pick her up. She felt so light in his arms, so fragile. He held her against his chest the way Rachel had shown him, swaying gently. It's okay. Daddy's here. The word felt strange coming out of his mouth. Daddy. He was someone's daddy. Lily's crying quieted to small whimpers. She stared up at him with those wide eyes that he now knew came from his mother's side of the family. His mother, who'd died 5 years ago, would have loved this baby. Would have probably smacked Daniel upside the head for missing the first 4 months of her granddaughter's life. Rachel appeared in the doorway, watching them. You're a natural, she said quietly. I'm terrified, Daniel admitted. What if I mess her up? What if I let her down the way I let you down? Then you apologize and do better. Rachel came to stand beside him, looking down at their daughter. That's all any parent can do. We mess up, we learn, we try again. Daniel looked at the woman he'd been married to, the mother of his child, and realized how little he'd actually known her when they were together. He'd thought he knew her, but he'd only known the version of her that fit into his busy schedule. He'd never really seen her strength, her resilience, her capacity to love someone more than herself. I'm going to make mistakes, he said. Probably a lot of them. But I want to be here, Rachel. Really here. Not just for Lily, but for you too. Not as a husband, he added quickly, seeing her expression change. I know that ship has sailed. But as a partner in raising her, as someone who has your back, you shouldn't have to do this alone anymore. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, watching Lily grab Daniel's finger with her tiny hand. Okay, she finally said. But I need you to prove it. Don't just tell me you've changed. Show me. Show up when you say you will. Answer the phone at 2 a.m. when she's sick and I'm scared. Miss the important meetings when she has her first real smile or her first time rolling over. I will. And if you can't do it, Rachel continued, her voice stronger now, if you realize that being a dad is harder than you thought and you want out, tell me. Don't just fade away. Don't make promises you can't keep. Because she deserves better than that. We both do. I understand. Lily yawned, a tiny sound that made both adults smile despite the heavy conversation. Daniel looked down at his daughter and made a silent promise. He was going to be the father she deserved, even if it meant tearing down everything he'd built, even if it meant admitting he'd been wrong about what success really looked like. Can I ask you something? Rachel said after a moment. Anything. What about your company? Your big expansion plans? Your board meeting today? Daniel smiled, still looking at Lily. I promoted my COO to president this morning. Gave him full operational control. I'm staying on as chairman, but I'm cutting my hours in half. Maybe more, depending on what Lily needs. Rachel stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You're serious, completely. Turns out the company runs just fine without me micromanaging everything. Who knew? He looked up at Rachel. I spent years building something that I thought mattered. But this? He gently bounced Lily, who was starting to fall asleep in his arms. This actually does matter. She matters, and I'm not going to miss it anymore. For the first time since that day outside the cafe, Rachel smiled at him. A real smile, not the careful, guarded ones from before. Okay, she said. Let's try this. Together. And standing in that tiny bedroom in an apartment he would have turned his nose up at 6 months ago, holding his daughter for only the third time in her life, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was finally becoming the man he was supposed to be all along. 3 weeks later, Daniel learned that being a father was nothing like running a company. You couldn't schedule a baby. You couldn't negotiate with one. And you definitely couldn't delegate when things got messy, which, as Daniel discovered at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, they frequently did. I don't understand, he said, staring down at Lily as she screamed in his arms. I changed her diaper. I fed her. I burped her. What else is there? Rachel appeared in the doorway of her bedroom, hair wild from sleep. Or from the lack of it. Daniel wasn't sure either of them had actually slept more than an hour at a time since he'd started staying over to help with night feedings. Sometimes babies just cry, Rachel said, taking Lily from him. She held the baby against her shoulder and started that swaying motion that seemed to be hardwired into every mother. There's not always a reason. Sometimes they just need to get it out. Daniel watched, feeling useless. There has to be something we can do. We're doing it. We're here. We're trying. Rachel's voice was hoarse with exhaustion. That's all we can do. Lily's cries started to quiet, reduced to hiccuping sobs. Daniel had learned that sound meant she was finally wearing herself out. Sure enough, within a few minutes she was asleep again, her tiny face still red and tear-streaked. Rachel carefully laid her back in the crib, and both adults held their breath, waiting to see if she'd stay asleep. When Lily didn't stir, they tiptoed out of the room like they were defusing a bomb. In the kitchen, Daniel collapsed into one of the rickety chairs. How did you do this alone for 4 months? Badly. Rachel poured them both water from the tap. Her apartment still didn't have a water filter, something Daniel had offered to buy 3 times and she'd refused 3 times. There were nights I just cried with her, Nights I called my sister at 3 in the morning because I was sure something was wrong. Nights I fell asleep sitting up because I was too scared to put her down. Daniel felt that familiar wave of guilt. He'd gotten better at not wallowing in it, but it still hit him sometimes. All those nights Rachel had been alone, terrified and exhausted, while he'd been sleeping peacefully in his king-size bed. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," he said for what felt like the 100th time. "I know." Rachel sat down across from him. "You keep saying that, and I keep saying I forgive you. But Daniel, at some point we need to stop apologizing for the past and just focus on doing better now." She was right. They'd had some version of this conversation every few days since they'd started co-parenting. The weight of everything they'd done wrong hung over them like a cloud that neither could quite dispel. "Okay," Daniel said, "so let's talk about now. This apartment is too small for the three of us when I stay over. I end up on that couch that's basically a torture device, you're cramped in your room with the crib, and Lily's outgrowing her sleeping space." Rachel's jaw tightened. "If you're about to suggest I move into your penthouse, I'm not." Daniel held up his hands. "But I did find a place. A house, actually. 3 bedrooms, a real yard, in a good school district. It's about 15 minutes from here. Daniel, I can't afford—" "I'm not asking you to. I'm buying it." He saw her about to protest and quickly continued. "For Lily, so she has a real home. So she has a yard to play in when she's older. So you're not living in a neighborhood where you're afraid to walk at night." Rachel crossed her arms. "And where would you live in this scenario?" "There's an apartment above the garage. I'd take that. Separate entrance, separate space. You and Lily get the main house. We'd be close enough that I can help at night, but you'd have your privacy and independence." Rachel stared at him. "You want to live in an apartment above a garage?" "I want to be near my daughter. And honestly," Daniel looked around the cramped kitchen, "after spending time here, my penthouse feels empty. Too big, too quiet. Too much like a museum and not enough like a place where people actually live. This is crazy. Maybe. But is it any crazier than what we're doing now? I'm basically living out of a duffel bag, sleeping on your torture couch 3 nights a week and commuting to work in yesterday's wrinkled shirt." He ran a hand through his hair. "At least this way we'd both have our own space, but I'd be here when you need me." "When she needs me." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "I need to think about it. Fair enough. Just promise me you'll come look at it. That's all I'm asking." She nodded slowly, and Daniel could see the wheels turning in her mind. He'd learned to read her expressions over the past few weeks. This one meant she was warring between pride and practicality. Pride said she should refuse, should insist on doing things herself, should maintain the independence she'd fought so hard for. Practicality whispered that she was exhausted, that help was being offered, that Lily deserved better than this cramped apartment. The next afternoon, Rachel agreed to see the house. Daniel had arranged for Rachel's sister to watch Lily, knowing this conversation needed to happen without a baby between them. The house was perfect. Not too big, not too small. It had hardwood floors that creaked in a homey way, a kitchen with actual counter space, and a backyard with an old oak tree that would be perfect for a swing someday. The apartment above the garage was small but functional, with its own kitchen and bathroom. Rachel walked through the main house in silence, running her hand along the kitchen counter, looking out at the backyard, checking the bedrooms. Daniel followed her, trying not to say anything that would sound like a sales pitch. Finally, in what would be Lily's room, Rachel spoke. "The thing is, Daniel, I know you mean well. I know you're trying to help, but I'm terrified that if I say yes to this, I'm giving up the independence I fought so hard for, that I'm putting myself in a position where you have all the power again." "I get that," Daniel said, "and I've thought about that too. So I talked to my lawyer about it." Rachel's eyebrows shot up. "Of course you did. Wait, hear me out." He pulled some papers from his jacket. "I'd put the house in a trust for Lily. You'd have full legal right to live here as her guardian until she's 18. I couldn't kick you out. Couldn't use it as leverage. It would be hers and by extension yours. Completely protected." Rachel took the papers, scanning them with her paralegal's eye. "You've really thought this through?" "I have. Because I know I messed up before by making decisions without thinking about how they'd affect you, how they'd make you feel. I'm trying to do better." She looked up at him and something in her expression softened. "You are doing better. That's what scares me." "What do you mean?" Rachel set the papers down and moved to the window, looking out at the backyard. When we were married, I kept waiting for you to change. Kept hoping that you'd wake up one day and realize what you were missing. It never happened. And eventually I had to accept that it never would. Rachel, but now, she continued, you're actually changing. You're showing up. You're trying. You're putting Lily first. And part of me is terrified that this is temporary, that once the novelty wears off, you'll go back to being the man who was never home, the man who looked at me like I was an inconvenience. Daniel felt like he'd been punched, but he couldn't deny that she had every reason to fear that. Talk was cheap. He'd made promises before and broken them. I can't prove to you that this is permanent, he said quietly. Not with words. All I can do is keep showing up. Keep being here. Keep putting her first and you by extension because you're her mother and she needs you to be okay. And what about when it's hard? Rachel turned to face him. What about when work calls with an emergency? What about when there's a deal that could make you millions but it means missing Lily's first birthday? What about when being a father stops feeling new and exciting and just becomes exhausting? Then I deal with it. I choose her anyway. I choose to be exhausted. I choose to miss the deal. He took a step closer. Rachel, I know I can't undo the past. But I'm not that man anymore. That man lost everything that mattered because he was too blind to see what he had. I'm not making that mistake again. From downstairs, they heard the front door open. Rachel's sister's voice called up. Everything okay? Lily's getting fussy. We should go, Rachel said, but she didn't move toward the stairs. What do you think? Daniel asked. About the house? Rachel looked around the room one more time and Daniel could see her imagining it. Lily's crib in the corner. A changing table under the window. Toys scattered on the floor. A real nursery, not a corner of Rachel's bedroom. I think, she said slowly, that I want to say yes. But I'm scared. That's okay. Being scared is okay. Daniel met her eyes. We can take it slow. You can think about it. Talk to your sister. Talk to a lawyer if you want. Whatever you need to feel safe. Rachel nodded, then surprised him by reaching out and squeezing his hand. Thank you. For understanding. For not pushing. I'm learning, Daniel said with a small smile. They went back to Rachel's apartment to pick up Lily, who was indeed fussy and ready for her mother. As Daniel watched Rachel comfort their daughter, he thought about how different his life looked now compared to 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, his biggest concern had been quarterly projections. Now his biggest concern was whether he'd remembered to add diaper cream to the shopping list. 3 weeks ago, he'd measured success in dollars and deals. Now success was making it through the night without Lily crying for more than 20 minutes. 3 weeks ago, he'd been living for himself. Now every decision he made started with the question, is this what's best for Lily? That night, as he lay on Rachel's torture couch trying to find a position that didn't make his back scream, Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. I want to say yes to the house, but I need time. Is that okay? He smiled in the darkness and typed back, take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time in his life, Daniel meant it. He'd spent years chasing the next thing, always looking ahead to the next goal, the next achievement. But now, lying in a cramped apartment on an uncomfortable couch, listening to his daughter breathe through the baby monitor, Daniel realized he was exactly where he wanted to be. The journey wasn't over. They had a long way to go and plenty of hard conversations still ahead. But they were moving forward, together, and that was enough. 4 months after that encounter outside the cafe, Daniel sat in a rocking chair he'd assembled himself, watching the sunrise through the window of Lily's nursery. The house had happened faster than either of them expected. Rachel had said yes 2 weeks after seeing it, with the condition that everything be done legally properly with both of them protected. Daniel had agreed immediately. They'd moved in a month ago, and he was still getting used to living above a garage after years in a penthouse. He wouldn't trade it for anything. Lily stirred in his arms, making those small sounds that meant she was about to wake up. She was 8 months old now and changing so fast it made Daniel's head spin. Every day brought something new. A different expression. A new sound. Yesterday she'd clapped for the first time and both he and Rachel had cheered so loudly they'd startled her into crying. Good morning, sweet girl, Daniel whispered, as Lily's eyes opened. She looked up at him and smiled. That gummy, whole-face smile that made every sleepless night worth it. He'd learned so much in these past months, How to change a diaper in under a minute. How to make a bottle at 3 in the morning with his eyes closed. How to tell the difference between a hungry cry and a tired cry. How to function on 4 hours of sleep and still make it through the day. But more than that, he'd learned what it meant to be truly present. To put his phone down when Lily reached for him. To cancel a meeting because she was running a fever. To understand that the most important deal he'd ever close was the one he made every day to be the father she deserved. The door to the nursery opened quietly. Rachel stood there in pajama pants and an old college sweatshirt, her hair in a messy bun. She looked tired but content, softer somehow than she'd been during their marriage. "She's up early," Rachel said, coming to stand beside the rocking chair. "Wanted to see the sunrise, apparently." Daniel looked up at her. "Coffee's ready downstairs. I started it before I came up." "You're a saint." Rachel smiled, then held out her arms. "My turn?" Daniel carefully transferred Lily to her mother, and the baby immediately snuggled into Rachel's chest. He watched them together, this mother and daughter who'd survived so much before he'd gotten his act together, and felt that familiar mix of gratitude and regret. "Stop it," Rachel said without looking at him. "Stop what?" "That thing you do where you beat yourself up for the past." She looked at him now. "I can see it on your face. You get this expression like you're mentally flagellating yourself." "Is flagellating really a word people use in normal conversation?" Daniel asked, trying to deflect. "Don't change the subject," but Rachel was smiling. "We've been through this, Daniel." "Yes, you messed up." "Yes, I messed up too. But look at what we've built since then. Look at her." Lily had grabbed a handful of Rachel's hair and was examining it with intense concentration, as if it held the secrets of the universe. "I know," Daniel said. "I just think about what I almost missed. What I did miss, and it kills me. Then let it motivate you instead of dragging you down." Rachel gently extracted her hair from Lily's grip. "You're here now. That's what matters." They went downstairs together, falling into the morning routine they'd developed. Daniel made breakfast while Rachel nursed Lily. Then they switched. Rachel eating while Daniel played with the baby, making her laugh with silly faces and peekaboo. It was domestic and ordinary and nothing like the life Daniel had imagined for himself. It was better. His phone buzzed with a message from his COO about a potential acquisition. 6 months ago, Daniel would have been on a call immediately, diving into the details, letting it consume his entire morning. Instead, he sent back a quick message. "Looks good. You handle it. Trust your judgment." Then he turned his phone face down and focused on his daughter, who was trying to eat her own foot. "That's new," he observed. "She discovered her feet yesterday. Been obsessed with them ever since." Rachel laughed as Lily managed to get her toes into her mouth. "Babies are weird. The weirdest." Daniel tickled Lily's belly, making her squeal with delight. And the best. Later that afternoon, after Lily went down for her nap, Daniel and Rachel found themselves in the backyard. Daniel had been working on installing the swing he'd promised, hanging it from the old oak tree. Rachel sat on the porch steps watching him work. "You know what's strange?" Rachel said after a while. "What?" "This feels more like a marriage than our actual marriage ever did." Daniel stopped what he was doing and turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" Rachel gestured around them. The routine we've built. The way we communicate now. The way we make decisions together about Lily. When we were married, we lived in the same house, but we were basically strangers. Now we're divorced, living in separate spaces, and I feel closer to you than I ever did before." Daniel sat down on the steps beside her, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I've thought about that too. I think before I was so focused on being successful that I forgot to actually live. I was performing the role of husband without understanding what it meant. And now I'm too busy being a dad to worry about performing anything. I'm just here, present, real." He looked at her. "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you ever regret it? Stepping back from the company? Giving up the lifestyle you had? The recognition, the success, all of it?" Daniel thought about it, really thought about it. Did he miss the rush of closing a major deal? Sometimes. Did he miss being the center of attention at board meetings? Occasionally. Did he miss the penthouse and the expensive dinners and being called a visionary in business magazines? "No," he said finally. "Not even a little bit. You know what I did miss? Lily's first time rolling over. I was in a meeting and you texted me about it, and by the time I got home, the moment was gone. That's the only thing I regret now. The moments I'm not here for. Rachel's eyes were suspiciously shiny. You've really changed. I had to. The alternative was losing everything that actually mattered. He bumped her shoulder gently with his. Besides, success isn't what I thought it was. I thought it was money and power and being on magazine covers. Turns out it's watching your daughter figure out her own feet. It's being there at 3 in the morning when she needs you. It's building a swing and knowing she'll use it someday. You're going to make me cry, Rachel said, wiping her eyes. Sorry. Don't be. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and Daniel held very still, afraid to break the moment. They'd gotten comfortable with each other again, but this felt different. More intimate, like maybe they were healing into something new. Daniel? Rachel's voice was soft. Yeah? I'm glad you saw us that day, outside the cafe. I'm glad you demanded to know the truth, really, even though I was a complete jerk about it. Rachel laughed. Yes, even though you were a jerk, because I don't think I could have done this forever, keeping you away from her, pretending you didn't exist. It was eating me alive, even though I told myself it was the right thing to do. We both made mistakes, Daniel said, but we're fixing them. Together. From inside the house, they heard Lily start to fuss over the baby monitor. Her nap was over. My turn, Daniel said, standing up. No, I'll get her. Rachel, you've been with her all morning. Let me. They both stopped and looked at each other, then laughed. This was new too. Both of them wanting to be the one to respond instead of both trying to avoid responsibility. Rock, paper, scissors, Rachel suggested. You're on. Daniel lost, but he didn't mind. He watched Rachel head inside, then turned back to the swing. He tested the ropes one more time, making sure everything was secure. Lily wouldn't be old enough to use it for months yet, but he wanted it ready. Wanted to be ready for all the moments to come. His phone buzzed again. Another message from work. This one marked urgent. Daniel glanced at it, saw it was about a competitor trying to poach one of their developers, and felt a small flicker of his old instinct to jump in and fix it. Then he heard Rachel's voice through the window, singing softly to Lily. Some lullaby he didn't recognize, but that made his daughter coo with happiness. And Daniel realized he didn't need to fix everything. He didn't need to be the center of every solution. His team could handle it. His COO could handle it. He typed back, "You've got this. Full authority to handle as you see fit." Then he put his phone in his pocket and went inside to where his real life was waiting. Rachel was in the living room, Lily on a blanket on the floor, surrounded by toys. The baby had discovered how to roll from her back to her stomach and was very proud of this new skill, doing it over and over while Rachel cheered her on. Daniel lay down on the floor beside them, and Lily immediately rolled toward him, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Hey, you!" He scooped her up and blew a raspberry on her belly, making her shriek with laughter. This was his life now. Not board meetings and power lunches and magazine interviews. Just this, a baby who smiled when she saw him. A woman who trusted him again, slowly, carefully. A home that felt like a home instead of a showpiece. Daniel had spent years climbing a ladder thinking success was at the top, but he'd been climbing the wrong ladder entirely. Real success was right here on a blanket on the floor, watching his daughter discover her world. "I love you, Lily," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. "Daddy loves you so much." And as Rachel smiled at him from across the blanket, as Lily grabbed his nose with her tiny fingers, as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of this house they'd built together, Daniel finally understood what he'd been searching for all along.